Chapter 16, Strictly Refusing Swordsmanship Training. The funeral speech continued until evening. Throughout the entire process, Uchiha Tunan felt that he was able to control his emotions quite well. The setting of people was more successful. This was under the circumstance that Uchiha Tunan's parents had no friends. They believed that if their best friends saw Uchiha Tunan's performance, they would immediately agree with him. In this regard, Uchiha Tunan could only secretly shake his head. His strength was poor and his social relationship was even worse. It was really a failure. The next day, Uchiha Tunan, dressed in a white shirt and wearing gold-rimmed glasses, arrived at Kakashi's house early in the morning. From far away, through the ninja beast white pigeon, Uchiha Tunan saw Kakashi standing at the door and looking at the intersection. But when Uchiha Tunan appeared at the intersection, Kakashi pretended to be lazy and casually glanced at Uchiha Tunan, then stared at the morning sun. It was as if the new sun in the sky was beautiful. Do you think of me as your closest partner? If history doesn't change, Kakashi will obtain the Sharingan, and then die when pain attacked Konoha. Wouldn't I be able to? The Kamui is a good skill, which can greatly enhance Uchiha Tunan's life-saving ability. In this way, you are not so weak and prove to be a great pawn. Thinking of this, Uchiha Tunan looked at Kakashi with a burning gaze, the corners of his mouth slightly outlined. Out of the corner of his eye, Kakashi saw Uchiha Tunan staring at him with an affectionate gaze, and also a creepy smile. The corner of his mouth under the mask unconsciously curved up, and he said in a nonchalant tone, "You came so early." Uchiha Tunan restrained his smile a little and said in an unusually gentle tone under the sunlight, "Yesterday, before father and mother's grave, I promised them that I would work hard to become their pride. Father taught me that I must keep my word." Kakashi nodded and led Uchiha Tunan into the courtyard. Kakashi casually pointed at Uchiha Tunan's gold-rimmed glasses and said, "I wanted to ask you a few days ago. Is there something wrong with your eyes? Why are you wearing glasses?" Uchiha Tunan used two middle fingers to hold up the glasses and explained, "Every night, I have to study and summarize the philosophy and knowledge of the past Hokage. Maybe because the lights at home are too dark, my eyes are a little short-sighted." When Kakashi heard this, he paused and frowned slightly. He said nervously, "That sounds like a big problem during fight." His words were full of undisguised concern. Uchiha Tunan smiled gently and said, "It doesn't have much of an effect on fighting. As long as I open my Sharingan, there will be no problem of my short sight. Thank you for your concern, Kakashi." Kakashi's brows relaxed, and he realized that he had lost his composure just now. He turned his face to the other side and said, "Tisk, I don't care about you." The wind chimes under the eaves made a sound under the breeze. "So you came today too, Tunan?" Sakuma was wearing a large home uniform with a short blade hanging from his waist. He sat cross-legged in front of the door and greeted Uchiha Tunan with a smile. Uchiha Tunan quickly put his hands on his knees and bowed respectfully. "Lord White Fang, I am very sorry to disturb your rest early in the morning." Sakuma did not put on any airs and waved his hand, "There is nothing to disturb. I am very happy that Kakashi can be with you. I also want to thank Tunan for urging Kakashi to cultivate when I am not at home." Just as he finished speaking, Sakuma saw Uchiha Tunan staring straight at the short blade at his waist. "Does Tunan also like sword skills? I have some understanding." Uchiha Tunan adjusted his glasses. Sakuma took off the short blade at his waist and gently stroked it with his hand. "If you like it, I can teach you some of the Hatakuryu sword technique." Uchiha Tunan shook his head and said seriously, "No need, I don't deserve it, not to mention this Hatakuryu sword technique, just from the name, you can tell it is White Fang Sama's family blade technique. How can you pass it on to an outsider like me?" Regarding Uchiha Tunan's righteous answer, Sakuma had a higher evaluation of him in his heart. With a face full of appreciation, he said, "Your talent is very good, and your relationship with Kakashi is so good, I don't mind passing it to you. I believe that after you learn this technique, with the dynamic vision of the Sharingan, your strength will definitely improve greatly." Uchiha Tunan firmly shook his head and refused. Thank you, Lord White Fang, for your kindness, but I still can't accept it. As a member of the Uchiha clan, I already have the Sharingan. I should focus on developing eye techniques. This is the way to cultivate for me. He was actually able to resist the temptation of the Hatakuryu sword technique and clearly recognize the path that was suitable for him. What a good child. Kakashi was lucky to have such a companion. The more he looked at Uchiha Tunan, the more satisfied he became. He said, I won't teach you the essence of the Hatakuryu sword technique. But I will teach you some basic saber techniques so that you can practice with Kakashi. This will also help with the progress of Kakashi's saber technique. What do you think? At the same time, Kakashi also looked at Uchiha Tunan. Uchiha Tunan was someone Kakashi recognized. Although the Hatakuryu sword technique was precious, it was obviously not as important as Uchiha Tunan's position in his heart. Kakashi did not mind Uchiha Tunan learning his family's heirloom saber technique. He even wanted to do his best to improve Uchiha Tunan's strength. Facing Tsukumo's kind intentions and Kakashi's eager eyes, Uchiha Tunan said reluctantly, All right, thank you, Lord White Fang. It was good to learn the Hatakuryu sword technique. This way, after Tsukumo died, he could also use it openly. Of course, at that time, his own Hatakuryu sword technique might be better than Tsukumo's. Both of you, come with me. With Uchiha Tunan's consent, Tsukumo raised his short blade and led the two to the backyard to begin teaching the knife technique. At this time, Kakashi had only just come into contact with the Hatakuryu sword technique. Tsukumo gave each of them a short wooden blade and began to teach them from the beginning. The Hatakuryu sword technique originates from ancient warriors. There are 3 steps in cultivation. The first step is to learn basic chopping. This process requires countless practice to make the saber a part of your body. The second step was to learn all kinds of fighting skills, and use the knife in his hand to deal with all kinds of different enemies. This required actual combat practice. The third step was the essence of the wood-style knife method, and using chakra to strengthen the knife method. As soon as he said this, Uchiha Tunan immediately interrupted Tsukumo and said seriously, Lord White Fang, don't tell me the third step. Please explain it to Kakashi in private. Tsukumo paused for a moment and nodded, all right. What a decent little fellow. Even the gaze he used to look at Uchiha Tunan had a hint of admiration in it. In that case, all of you should first see how I hacked it. For the next period of time, all of you will have to repeat this dull and boring action. Until you transform these movements into instinct. After saying that, Tsukumo began to slash at the wooden stake. Uchiha Tunan had already opened his Sharingan to capture Tsukumo's movements, and he also swung the wooden stake in front of him. When Tsukumo saw the 3 hooks in Uchiha Tunan's eyes, he couldn't help but praise in his heart. The Sharingan was indeed a powerful eye technique, at least in learning some basic things, it was much better than his peers. Chapter 17, Meeting Uchiha Mane. Uchiha Tunan practiced his blade technique for the entire day at the Hatake clan's residence and walked back home, exhausted. Just as he reached the outside of the Uchiha clan's territory, he saw Naoto Umino standing on the road that he had to pass through. He was looking forward to it. Tunan. Naoto Umino waved his hand at Uchiha Tunan. Uchiha Tunan adjusted his glasses and came up to Naoto Umino. He bowed respectfully and said, Teacher Umino, are you waiting for me here? Naoto Umino stuffed a thick envelope into Uchiha Tunan's hand. This is the compensation for the death of your parents and the reward for killing the enemy village spies. During this period of time, the Hokage is busy, and he sent me to pass it to you. Uchiha Tunan took the envelope and did not look at it. He bowed to Naoto Umino and said, I asked you to make a special trip for me. Sorry to trouble you, Mr. Umino. Naoto Umino scratched his head and revealed a gentle smile. It's a small matter. It's not a problem. On the other hand, you were able to kill a Chunin spy by yourself, how amazing. Not worth mentioning. Uchiha Tunan shook his head with a faint smile. The more Naoto Umino looked at Uchiha Tunan, the more pleasing he became. he said with concern, look at your tired face. Did you just come back from cultivation? Uchiha Tunan nodded and said, yes, I was lucky enough to get some guidance from Sakumo-san. Konoha's White Fang, it seems that Tunan's talent is higher than I thought, and he can pique the interest of White Fang. Thinking of this, Naoto Umino said with concern, you can work hard, but you have to pay attention to rest. I won't delay your rest time. See you at school tomorrow. Thank you for your hard work, Mr. Umino. Goodbye. Naoto Umino turned around and left. After walking for half a street, he looked back and saw that Uchiha Tunan was still standing there and watching him. He could not help but feel a little touched. I didn't expect that I could teach a student who is so outstanding in both talent and character. Go back. Naoto Umino shouted from afar. Uchiha Tunan didn't reply and only responded with a gentle smile. After Naoto Umino's figure disappeared, he turned around and walked into the clan grounds. The Uchiha guards patrolling around the clan grounds saw Uchiha Tunan and nodded in goodwill. Uchiha Tunan replied with a gentle smile. No matter which world it was always like this. Just as he returned home, Uchiha Tunan saw the Great Elder standing at the entrance of his courtyard. It was obvious that he had been waiting for a long time. Tunan, you are back. First Elder greeted Uchiha Tunan first. Uchiha Tunan put his hands on his knees and bowed. He said calmly, greetings, First Elder. The Great Elder smiled and waved his hand. He stuffed the thick envelope into Uchiha Tunan's hand and said, we are a family. There is no need to be so polite. This time, I came here specifically to give you the pension for your parents' deaths and your living expenses for this month. Uchiha Tunan secretly pinched the envelope with his fingers. This thickness was much more generous than the Sarutobi Hiruzen. Then with a puzzled expression, he asked, didn't the Hokage-sama already give out pension? The Great Elder looked at Uchiha Tunan and said, Hokage-sama represents the village, and our Uchiha clan naturally treats people of the same clan as him. Now that you have become an orphan, you can receive the corresponding living expenses every month. If you have any difficulties, feel free to come to me, or find the chief. We will do our best to help you. After he finished speaking, he patted Uchiha Tunan on the shoulder, and without any extra explanation or movements, he directly turned around and left. The Great Elder's move was truly brilliant. It was fine to deal with others, but to deal with Uchiha Tunan, who was well versed in the ways of the world, he was a bit too inexperienced. This was where the technique of giving gifts was. The goodwill has already been delivered, and it will take some time to ferment. If you stay here and talk about something, others will definitely think that you have other plans. Uchiha Tunan returned home, took out the money from the 2 envelopes and put it in the storage cabinet. It seemed that he had already become a popular person. The pension that Sarutobi had given him had already exceeded the standard by too much. 2 Chunin would not even have this much. The Great Elder was even more willing to pay the capital, directly twice as much as Sarutobi had given him. Uchiha Tunan guessed that the Great Elder had not planned to give so much before. It should have been known by the Great Elder when Naoto Umino was outside the Uchiha clan. Through the thickness of the envelope in Naoto Umino's hand, the Great Elder guessed the general amount of Sarutobi Hiruzen. So he temporarily added twice. This was a good thing for Uchiha Tunan. The Chunin parents died in battle, and the compensation they received was the same as the death of the 2 Jounin parents. With money, I could nurture more white pigeon ninja beasts. Until the 3rd battle began, he did not have to worry about not having enough money. The next day, Uchiha Tunan went out as usual and went to the ninja school. Before he left the clan grounds, he met his classmate, Uchiha Mane. Uchiha Mane's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. She greeted Uchiha Tunan, Tunan, I didn't expect such a coincidence. Yeah, what a coincidence. A gentle smile appeared on Uchiha Tunan's face. The two of them walked shoulder to shoulder towards the school. Uchiha Tunan naturally knew that this was not a coincidence. She had long seen Uchiha Mane sneaking around at this intersection. Uchiha Tunan had no intention to expose her. After all, Uchiha Menai had a very high chance of becoming his food. Naturally, he had to be more considerate towards his food. Speaking of rations, Uchiha Tunan remembered that Uchiha Menai was not the only one in his class. If he could not get the approval of Sakumo, he would be in danger. These rations might play a key role, especially Uchiha Menai. In his previous life, he had never even heard of this name, so it was basically certain death. Moreover, it was the Uchiha clan. If he wanted to think of a way to increase her strength, then. If he operated it well and was lucky, then perhaps she could awaken the 3 Magatama Sharingan. To contribute a little to his Manjikyu. Thinking of this, Uchiha Tunan's eyes lit up and he turned to look at Uchiha Menai. Uchiha Menai looked straight ahead, but in fact, she had been secretly paying attention to Uchiha Tunan. When she saw Uchiha Tunan looking at her, her little heart could not help but beat wildly. Tunan, is there a problem? As soon as Uchiha Menai asked this question, she immediately wanted to give herself a slap in her heart. How could she ask this? Would Tunan feel embarrassed? If Tunan had a good impression of me just now, and was asked by me like this, would he not like me? I feel that you are different from the other clansmen. Uchiha Tunan, this kind of old coin, was much more thick-skinned than ordinary people. Of course, he would not feel embarrassed. Really? How is it different? Uchiha Menai felt sweet in her heart, and her face had a hint of shyness. Obito, most of the people I have seen are a little too proud. But you are different, Menai. I usually think you are lively. I didn't expect you to have such a cute side in private. Uchiha Tunan said with a gentle smile, as if he was stating a fact, without a trace of flattery. The two chatted while walking. They were very much like a young couple in the previous life. Chapter 18, Hyuga Dinner Invitation. In the classroom. Because of her father's death, Hyuga Chiryu sat alone in her seat, gloomily. Several male students gathered around, laughing and playing. However, these male students stole glances at Hyuga Chiryu from time to time while they were playing. The love of a little boy was hidden and revealed. In the impression of the students, Hyuga Chiryu had always been very gentle and weak. This kind of personality could arouse the desire of a young male to protect her. Although Hyuga Chiryu sat in her seat dejectedly, her eyes occasionally glanced at the classroom door. I heard that Tunan's parents also died on the battlefield. He is an orphan like me. We are the same kind of people. Bang. As the two male students bickered with each other, one of them pressed the other to the ground. I'm convinced. I'm not convinced. I'm convinced. Humph, Chiryu, last time, Asuma secretly said that he likes you. No. I didn't. Asuma immediately stood up and looked at Hyuga Chiryu helplessly. Hyuga Chiryu calmly looked at Asuma and then buried her head in her arms. She's shy. Does she like me too? Asuma stood there in a daze, thinking a lot for a moment. At this moment, Uchiha Tunan walked into the classroom with Uchiha Menai. The entire classroom suddenly fell silent. After a few breaths, the entire classroom erupted with cheers. Basically, it was the boys who were booing, and it was roughly the two of them getting married on the spot or something. Uchiha Menai did not have any intention of refuting, and just lowered her head with a shy expression. This made the originally noisy crowd feel that the two really had an affair. Meanwhile, Uchiha Tunan only smiled gently. He did not refute or admit it. He politely greeted everyone and said, "Good morning, everyone." In the classroom, only Hyuga Chiryu stared at Uchiha Tunan and Uchiha Menai. She clenched his fists. She kept shouting in her heart. No, Tunan and I are the same kind. Tunan can only be mine. Yes, Tunan didn't admit it. He wouldn't have feelings for Menai. As for Menai, if you dare to steal Tunan, a trace of ferociousness flashed across the face of Hyuga Chiryu. It just so happened that Asuma, who had been staring at the sun and the moon, caught it. Chiryu, what's wrong with you? Asuma asked with concern. Time passed quickly in the morning. Almost every class ended, Uchiha Mainai would take the initiative to come over and chat with Uchiha Tunan. Hyuga Chiryu sat in the back seat, staring at the two of them every time. It was as if her beloved thing had been taken away. During the time before the last class in the afternoon, Uchiha Mainai did not come over. Uchiha Tunan was not interested in playing around with those students. Instead, he sat alone in his seat to learn the theory of the senior grade. Suddenly, a figure appeared out of the corner of Uchiha Tunan's eyes. He saw Hyuga Chiryu come to Uchiha Tunan with a book in her hands and said nervously, "Tunan, I can't understand what the teacher was talking about during the lesson. Can you teach me? It's only right for classmates to help each other. Come, sit down." Uchiha Tunan smiled and patted the empty seat beside him. Hyuga Chiryu nodded and sat down next to Uchiha Tunan. Uchiha Tunan leaned slightly and took the initiative to help Hyuga Chiryu open the book. When Hyuga Chiryu smelled the faint scent of soap on his white shirt, her brain buzzed for a moment. The teacher in class talked about the way to set up the explosive talisman and the conditions to release it from a distance. "What do you not know to tell me?" Uchiha Tunan's gentle voice pulled Hyuga Chiryu back to reality. But just now, Hyuga Chiryu was distracted and did not hear what Uchiha Tunan said. He could only stutter, I. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. You just don't understand everything." Uchiha Tunan leaned closer and pointed at the contents of the book. "It doesn't matter. I will tell you from the beginning. If I don't tell you once, I will tell you a few more times. You don't have to worry about trouble. If you really understand or find something you don't understand, just tell me." "Yes." Hyuga Chiryu's face was as red as a ripe persimmon. The essence of the explosion talisman. The humidity has an effect on the explosion talisman. Behind the two of them, Uchiha Mainai looked at this scene with a face full of anger. She secretly clenched her fists. Damn it, this bitch usually likes to pretend to be weak, but now he dares to seduce Tunan. No, Tunan-jun is a rational person. If I go over and make trouble, he will definitely think that I am unreasonable. I have to calm down. Tunan-jun does not like violent and arrogant girls. Humph, I almost fell for this bitch's trick. Not long later, the class bell rang. Uchiha Tunan gently turned his head and said to the nearby Hyuga Chiryu, "It's almost the last lesson. I can only teach you tomorrow." Hyuga Chiryu looked at Uchiha Tunan's eyes that were as bright as stars and said half-drunk, "Thank you. Can I treat you to a meal?" "I want to thank you." Uchiha Tunan paused for a moment and smiled brightly. "But after school, I will go to Kakashi's house to practice with him. It may be a little late to eat." "It's okay. I'll wait for you." "Alright then. Actually, even if you don't treat me to a meal, you don't have to feel like you owe me anything. I just want to thank you. What do you want to eat, Tunan?" "I'm fine with anything. Why don't we eat ramen? It's cheap and delicious." "Okay." Hyuga Chiryu nodded, held the book in her arms, and got up to leave the seat. As soon as she turned around, he saw Uchiha Mainai standing behind her expressionlessly, looking at her with a look that only women understood. Hyuga Chiryu understood what the other meant. The other was warning. With Uchiha Tunan present, both of them chose to keep the peace and only secretly exchanged glances. Uchiha Mainai also returned to her seat. She had heard the words that Hyuga Chiryu had invited Uchiha Tunan to dinner. Uchiha Mainai planned to teach her a lesson. After school, Uchiha Mainai originally planned to invite Uchiha Tunan to go home with her. However, she was interrupted by Kakashi. "Are you coming with me, or?" Kakashi shook her head lazily. Although Kakashi was not interested in what happened today, he still saw some of it. Kakashi felt that Uchiha Tunan was simply friendly to his classmates. It was those girls who wanted to take the initiative to pester him, because Kakashi also had a few little fangirls, which made him very annoyed. He felt that Uchiha Tunan should be the same as him. However, he still asked a symbolic question. "Of course I'm going to your house to practice sword arts together. Otherwise, where else can I go?" Uchiha Tunan pretended to be confused. Kakashi nodded. The two of them left the classroom side by side. Chapter 19, Woman's Battle. After school, Hyuga Chiryu went straight back home. After all, if she wanted to date Uchiha Tunan alone, she had to dress up properly. Meanwhile, Uchiha Mainai went straight to the ramen noodle house they had agreed on to wait for the rabbit. She was ready to teach Hyuga Chiryu a lesson. In the blink of an eye, it was evening. At Kakashi's house, Uchiha Tunan's 3 Magatama Sharingan spun and he leaped up, easily dodging the hand stretched out from under his feet. He pretended to be panting and looked at Kakashi, who had emerged from the ground. Kakashi, your heart-beheading technique is becoming more and more proficient. I almost couldn't dodge it. Although the two of them were using wooden blades to practice the wooden sword style, as ninjas, it was normal for them to use ninjutsu in the process of practice. Your body technique is much stronger than before, but your chakra is still too little. Kakashi thought that Uchiha Tunan had reached his limit. He put away the wooden blade and ended today's practice. Uchiha Tunan had an expression of being humbly taught, and said with a smile, compared to you, Kakashi, I am much worse. Other than having a pair of Sharingan, I am basically useless. Let's call it a day. I promised Chiryu that I would eat with her. Kakashi nodded and sent Uchiha Tunan out of the small courtyard. Uchiha Tunan left the Hatake family and headed to the agreed noodle house. At the same time, a few white pigeons perched in the trees not far away spread their wings and flew up, beginning to investigate the situation on Uchiha Tunan's route. There was basically no danger in Konoha, let alone in the middle of the day. However, Uchiha Tunan had never felt safe. These white pigeons had basically never been idle. On a commercial street, Hyuga Chiryu walked with anticipation. After school, she went home to wash up and changed into new clothes that she had never worn before. Hyuga Chiryu's footsteps were very slow. This road was the only way for Kakashi's family to go to the ramen noodle house. Maybe Uchiha Tunan would appear behind him soon. As a girl, if she went to the ramen noodle house too early to wait for someone, maybe others would gossip. It was best to enter the shop with Tunan. Hyuga Chiryu thought in her heart. However, just as she reached a corner of the commercial street, a slender hand suddenly appeared next to her and pulled Hyuga Chiryu into the alley. Bang! Caught off guard, Hyuga Chiryu lost her balance and fell to the ground. The new clothes on her body were dirty. Just as Hyuga Chiryu looked at the person with anger, a kunai was placed on Hyuga Chiryu's neck. Hyuga Chiryu took a closer look and saw that it was Uchiha Mainai. What are you doing? Hyuga Chiryu glared at Uchiha and said. Stay away from Tunan in the future. Hyuga Chiryu was about to explode when she suddenly thought of something. Tunan should be arriving soon. In other words, it was possible that Tunan would pass through this alley in the next second. Then, in the next moment, Hyuga Chiryu retracted her anger and said with a delicate face, how can you do this? We are classmates. Put away that disgusting look of yours. It is only because Tunan is simple-minded that he was deceived by you. A mere whore who had been separated from her family all day long had the delusion of seducing the genius of Uchiha's family. Who gave you the courage to not take a piss and look at yourself? You are too much. Do you really think I don't dare to kill you? The kunai in Uchiha Mainai's hand pushed forward, just a little bit more and it would pierce through the skin of Chiryu. A white pigeon just passed over the two of them. At this moment, Uchiha Tunan had already reached the street of this commercial street. Suddenly, Uchiha Tunan stopped at the end of the street. Through the view of the ninja beast white pigeon, everything that happened in the alley was seen by Uchiha Tunan. Were these two rations fighting for jealousy? Uchiha Tunan touched his chin and began to consider whether he should go to the hero rescue the beauty. Hyuga Chiryu, Uchiha Mainai. Byakugan, Sharingan. Well, it seems that the Sharingan can't merge with Byakugan. The role of this Hyuga Chiryu is not big. On the contrary, if you cultivate it well, maybe you can open the Sharingan before the third battle. Then, she would contribute his strength. Since there was no big use in visiting Hyuga Chiryu today, then he didn't care. It didn't matter if she died. After thinking it through, Uchiha Tunan turned around and walked towards another road, preparing to take a detour to the ramen noodle house. In the alley. Faced with Uchiha and Mainai's threat, Hyuga Chiryu was like a little kitten who was bullied by others, shivering in the corner. Mainai, I just want to thank Tunan for tutoring me. I have no other thoughts. Hyuga Chiryu wiped away her tears. Uchiha Mainai frowned and put away the kunai. Did I think too much? Was this bitch really not pretending? Was there really such an innocent and weak person in this world? Although Uchiha Mainai felt that Hyuga Chiryu was pretending from the bottom of her heart, what was the point of pretending in this situation? Alright, then promise me that you will not speak to Tunan in the future. Uchiha Mainai's stern tone was full of dominance. After all, she was a legitimate member of the Uchiha clan. Even if she was a woman, her personality was not too bad. It was just that in front of Uchiha Tunan, she was a little gentle, but in front of the same sex, she was still so strong. Hyuga Chiryu looked up with a weak face, looked at the sky, and then turned to look at the alley. At this time, Tunan had not passed through here yet. Was it the other way? The weakness in Hyuga Chiryu's eyes dissipated and she slowly stood up. Why are you standing up? Hurry up and say it. In the next instant. Bang! Hyuga Chiryu hit Uchiha Mainai in the chest. Uchiha Mainai felt a sharp pain, and her whole body hit the wall. Her meridians were blocked, and she couldn't raise any chakra in her body. Her kunai also fell to the ground. Uchiha Mainai couldn't believe it and looked up at the slowly walking sun, to Hyuga Chiryu. You. How is that possible? Looking at the indifferent face of Hyuga Chiryu, the blue veins around her eyes bulged, and she squatted down to pick up the kunai on the ground. Then she held kunai with her hand and pressed the tip against Uchiha Mainai's chin. She put his head close to Uchiha Mainai's ear and said coldly, Tunan is mine. If you dare to lay your eyes on him again, I'll kill you. After saying that, Hyuga Chiryu let go of the kunai and threw it on the ground. He patted the dust off his body and left the alley. In the ramen noodle house, Uchiha Tunan sat in his seat and observed the situation in the alley. To be honest, he knew that Uchiha Mainai and Hyuga Chiryu liked him and might pretend in front of him. But he didn't expect that Hyuga Chiryu was too good at pretending. Previously, Uchiha Tunan thought that she was the same as Haruno Sakura. As a result, sure enough, the more beautiful a woman is, the more she will deceive people, Uchiha Tunan murmured. He made up his mind to be more wary of the women in this world in the future. Tunan, I'm sorry I'm late. Hyuga Chiryu trotted all the way to the ramen noodle house and stood beside Uchiha Tunan, panting. Her red face made people who did not know the situation feel particularly cute. It's okay. I just arrived. Sit down and rest. Uchiha Tunan stood up like a gentleman, put his hands on Hyuga Chiryu's shoulders and helped her to her seat. On the other hand, Uchiha Tunan sat gently beside her. He lifted the kettle and tilted his body slightly towards Chiryu, pouring her a cup of water. He asked considerately, don't be in a hurry to eat after running violently. Drink a cup of water and relax a bit. Tunan. Hyuga Chiryu looked at Uchiha Tunan with stars in her eyes. This was not a disguise, but a genuine expression. You are mine, and you can only be mine. The ramen noodle house waiter came over and asked, what would you like to eat? Uchiha Tunan turned his head and asked in a gentle voice, Chiryu, what do you want to eat? Looking at Uchiha Tunan's eyes close to her and his voice, Hyuga Chiryu felt dizzy, as if she would get drunk in the next second. I'm not sure. Uchiha Tunan nodded and said, I ate with my mother a few times when I was a child. Then I will order for you. Chapter 20, Power of Love. The next day, Uchiha Tunan came to school early. She did not meet Uchiha Mainai on the way. It seemed that what happened yesterday was a big blow to her. But it had nothing to do with Uchiha Tunan. If it was possible, Uchiha Tunan hoped that Uchiha Mainai would become stronger after being humiliated and work hard to cultivate. If she could awaken her Sharingan, it would be even better. As soon as he entered the classroom, Uchiha Tunan saw Hyuga Chiryu holding her face with both hands, staring at him with a shy face. Uchiha Tunan immediately nodded at Hyuga Chiryu with goodwill. This scene was seen by Uchiha Mainai, who was sitting on the seat. She clenched her teeth and trembled with anger. During the time of each class, Hyuga Chiryu took the opportunity to come to Uchiha Tunan's side and asked her to help with her homework. Uchiha Tunan naturally would not refuse the approach of his ration. It seemed that in this love triangle, the other two people regarded themselves as harmless prey. As for who was the prey and who was the hunter, no one knew until the last moment. After school, Hyuga Chiryu naturally had no reason to pester Uchiha Tunan. After all, everyone knew that during the period after school, Uchiha Tunan belonged to Kakashi. However, on the way to the Hatake family, Uchiha Mainai caught up with Uchiha Tunan. Tunan. Uchiha Tunan and Kakashi turned their heads at the same time. Mainai, why are you looking for me? Uchiha Tunan adjusted his glasses and said gently. Uchiha Mainai took a deep breath and looked straight into Uchiha Tunan's eyes. I want to become stronger. Can you guide me in my cultivation? It's troublesome. Kakashi shrugged and muttered to Uchiha Tunan. I will go back to practice first and wait for you. After saying that, he walked straight ahead. Seeing Kakashi leave, Uchiha Tunan stared at Uchiha with a sincere face and said, We are all classmates. It is natural for us to help each other. I am willing to help you cultivate. Uchiha Mainai bowed to Uchiha Tunan and said, Thank you, Tunan. Uchiha Tunan nodded, then touched his chin and said, But I need to practice with Kakashi every day after school. How about this, after dinner every day, I will guide you for an hour in the martial arts arena in the north of the clan. What do you think? Yes. Uchiha Mainai nodded. Then I'll leave first. See you at the martial arts arena tonight. Uchiha Tunan turned around and was about to leave. Tunan. Uchiha Mainai stopped Uchiha Tunan. Uchiha Tunan stopped and asked in confusion, Is there anything else? Do you like Hyuga Chiryu? Uchiha stared straight at Uchiha Tunan, waiting for his answer. What kind of like do you mean? It's the kind between a man and a woman. Uchiha Tunan smiled and shook his head. Why do you think so? I have always treated Chiryu as my sister. Moreover, we are still so young, how can we have puppy love? This is not right. Puppy love? Uchiha Mainai was stunned for a moment. This was the first time she had heard someone say this word. After all, the average lifespan of people in the ninja world was not long. Many people were married and had children in their teens. Wasn't it normal to fall in love before marriage? Moreover, everyone was 6 years old, and they were basically 7 years old after the new year. They were not 3-year-old children. Was there a problem in falling in love? There was absolutely no problem. But as long as Uchiha Tunan admitted that he had no feelings for Hyuga Chiryu, Uchiha Mainai had already achieved her goal. Uchiha Mainai seemed to be full of energy all of a sudden. She smiled at Uchiha Tunan and said, That's nothing. Let's go to the martial arts arena tonight. In the evening, after having dinner, Uchiha Tunan went straight to the northern practice field. At this time, the sky was already getting dark, and there were sparse stars in the sky. Ding. Uchiha Mainai had already been practicing the kunai. Seeing Uchiha Tunan arrive, Uchiha Mainai showed a happy expression. Tunan, you are here. Uchiha Tunan glanced at the kunai on the target and then nodded to Uchiha Mainai. Well, Mainai, you are very diligent. However, I saw you throwing kunai at me just now. Come, I'll teach you. You should do this. Uchiha Tunan directly started to massage Uchiha Mainai's beautiful body, adjusting her posture. Don't swing your kunai with your arm, but with your wrist. Yes, bend a little here. When you practice, you can use the strength of your waist. This will help you control the strength of your whole body. Come, bend your waist a little more, lower down a little. Feeling Uchiha Tunan's hands wandering around her body, she adjusted her posture. A blush appeared on Uchiha Mainai's beautiful face. She bit her lips and said, Tunan. Hearing this, Uchiha Tunan paused and looked at Uchiha Mainai with sincere eyes. What's wrong? Is it too difficult? Hearing Uchiha Tunan's magnetic voice, Uchiha gulped and shook her head. No, thank you. No need to be polite, it's what I should do. Uchiha Tunan smiled warmly and continued to help Uchiha Mainai adjust her posture. Put away your stomach. There was no one around, the sky was dark, and there was a man and a woman alone. Uchiha Mainai could not focus at all. As a result, after Uchiha Tunan adjusted her posture, Uchiha Mainai did not hit the target once. An hour later. The two sat side by side on the grass. Uchiha Tunan looked at Uchiha Mainai apologetically and said, Sorry, Mainai. Maybe I taught you something wrong and made you waste an hour in vain. Faced with Uchiha Tunan's apology, Uchiha Mainai immediately said in a panic, No, Tunan taught me well. I was always absent-minded when I was practicing. Maybe I was too tired recently. I will be fine in a few days. Uchiha Tunan touched his chin and suddenly realized, so that's how it is. Then you have to pay more attention to rest. Uchiha Mainai listened to Uchiha Tunan's concerned words, and her heart could not help but feel sweet. She gently moved her butt towards Uchiha Tunan. The two of them got closer. Worried that Uchiha Tunan would discover her little trick, Uchiha Mainai quickly found a topic to talk about. Tunan, I heard from my clansmen that you awakened the Sharingan because an important person passed away. Uchiha Tunan looked up at the stars in the sky and said in a deep tone, Yes, I awakened the Sharingan at the beginning because my brother, Ameo-san, was killed by my kin. As for the three Magatama, when my father and mother died on the battlefield, Uchiha Mainai stared at the sight of Uchiha Tunan's face and said in a daze, Are the conditions so harsh? My parents died in the last ninja war. At that time, I was still young and ignorant. Moreover, my talent is not strong. It is estimated that it is difficult for me to awaken the Sharingan. How could that be? I believe that you can awaken it. Uchiha Tunan suddenly lowered his head and looked back at Uchiha Mainai. Uchiha Mainai's heart trembled, as if she had been caught by a prank. She quickly lowered her head and said, But awakening the Sharingan requires intense hatred. It seems that hatred also makes me unable to open my eyes. Wrong. Huh? Uchiha Mainai looked at Uchiha Tunan with a puzzled expression. Uchiha Tunan said seriously, opening one's eyes doesn't depend on hatred. But that's what everyone in the clan said. Uchiha was puzzled. After all, the Uchiha clan had existed for so many years, and everyone had basically figured out the conditions for opening their eyes. But today, Uchiha Tunan said that this method was wrong, but he saw Uchiha Tunan reach out to hold the frame and said in an inexplicable tone, The Uchiha clan is a clan of love. The power of love is always stronger than the power of hatred. When there is someone who loves, they will want to protect him. In the process of guarding, when our strength is insufficient, the bloodline will grant us power and help us open our eyes to protect the people we want to protect. Love? Uchiha Mainai felt dizzy. Yes, because I love Ameo-san, my father, and my mother. Uchiha Tunan nodded solemnly, so when my strength is not enough to protect them, the Uchiha bloodline hidden in my body will give me power and help me open my eyes to protect them. Uchiha Mainai felt that something was wrong, but it sounded very reasonable. She said doubtfully, But, I don't really understand love. Suddenly, Uchiha Mainai felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up and saw Uchiha Tunan patting her shoulder with a smile. I'll help you think of a way. I'll do my best to let you feel the power of love, okay? Is Tunan confessing to me? What are you thinking about? Tunan clearly wants to open my eyes for me. But opening my eyes needs to feel the power of love. How can I feel this love? While thinking, Uchiha Mainai felt the palm on her shoulder pinch slightly. Her entire heart trembled. Uchiha Mainai buried her head deeply and replied in a voice that could not be heard, I seem to have already felt it. The night had already fallen. In the darkness, Uchiha Tunan's deep eyes looked down at Uchiha Mainai in his arms, the corners of his mouth slightly outlined. It was true that hatred opened one's eyes, but extreme hatred was usually produced by love. Don't disappoint my good intentions. My ration. Chapter 21, Pet Strategy. The next day, Uchiha Tunan woke up early and walked out of Uchiha's home. He did not go straight to the ninja school, but went to a pet shop in the commercial street and chose a young cat. This young cat was completely white, and its 4 paws were pink, which was very cute. After putting the young cat into the small cage, gifted by the store, Uchiha Tunan went to the ninja school. As soon as he entered the classroom, he attracted a lot of attention as usual. Among them were Hyuga Chiryu and Uchiha Mainai. By the way, there was also Kakashi. Uchiha Tunan walked straight to Uchiha Mainai and placed the cage on Uchiha Mainai's table. I thought about it last night. This little guy might be able to help you. Uchiha Mainai looked at the kitten in the cage and said in surprise, Tunan, is this your gift for me? Yes. Thank you. When the students in the classroom saw this scene, they began to jeer again. In a corner where no one was paying attention, Hyuga Chiryu was completely lost in thought. She clenched his fists under the table. Her nails pierced through the skin of her palms, and traces of blood flowed out from between her fingers. Although Uchiha Mainai had been taught a lesson by Hyuga Chiryu last time. But as a member of the Uchiha clan, she would not really be afraid of Hyuga Chiryu. Moreover, Uchiha Mainai felt that the gap between the two of them was not particularly big. Moreover, with the guidance of Uchiha Tunan, she believed that it would not be long before she could defeat Hyuga Chiryu. Now that Uchiha Tunan had taken the initiative to give her a pet, she accepted it without any psychological burden. During class time, Naoto Umino was lecturing on the platform. Uchiha Tunan was as focused as ever, even if he had already learned all of this. However, in order to maintain the image in everyone's hearts, he could only pretend to listen. Hyuga Chiryu sat stiffly in her seat, her lifeless eyes staring at Uchiha Tunan's back. Meanwhile, Uchiha Mainai was secretly teasing the kitten that Uchiha Tunan had given her. Faced with the kitten that was curled up in a cage, Uchiha Mainai curiously extended her finger into it. The kitten carefully stuck its head out and sniffed in front of her finger. Then, it stuck out its pink tongue and licked it. Uchiha's beautiful heart melted in an instant. Looking up at the back of Uchiha Tunan in front of him, her heart was extremely sweet. Tunan, don't worry, I will take good care of this little fellow. After the first lesson was over, Hyuga Chiryu walked up to Uchiha Mainai with a cold face. Come out. Hyuga Chiryu said in a low voice, and then took the lead to walk toward the playground. Uchiha Mainai glanced at Uchiha Tunan, who was immersed in reading, and then followed her without fear. Under the shade of the trees on the playground, Hyuga Chiryu and Uchiha Mainai were standing opposite each other. Do you really think I don't dare to kill you? The veins around Hyuga Chiryu's eyes bulged, and a touch of morbid cruelty appeared on her face. Humph, why don't you pretend to be weak? Don't think that I will be afraid of you just because you roll your eyes. Uchiha Mainai crossed her arms over her chest and looked at Hyuga Chiryu in a victorious manner. Hyuga Chiryu slowly raised her hand and made a fist gesture. She said coldly, the same kind can only be with the same kind of people. I am an orphan like Tunan, and I am the most suitable person for him. Uchiha Mainai put down her hands and took out kunai from the ninja bag at her waist. She pointed at Hyuga Chiryu and said, ridiculous. My parents also died in the Second War. According to what you said, I am also an orphan. Why should I give Tunan to you? Hyuga Chiryu was slightly stunned and was silent for a long time. She seemed to be thinking about something. This was the ninja school. At most, he would teach Uchiha Mainai a lesson. It was impossible for her to really kill her. However, the consequence was that he would be punished, and if Tunan knew about it, she might never have a chance again. After thinking about it, Hyuga Chiryu stopped rolling his eyes, then knelt on the ground and said with her hands on the ground, "I beg you, give me Tunan, you still have clansmen." "But I have nothing, I only have Tunan." Uchiha Mainai did not expect Hyuga Chiryu to do this. "Give up." Uchiha's beautiful tone softened a little and she continued, "By the way, there is something you don't know." Hyuga Chiryu raised his head and looked at Uchiha Mainai with a puzzled look. "The Hyuga clan is not allowed to marry outsiders. I have never seen you as an eyesore, and I have never seen you as a love rival." After Uchiha Mainai finished speaking, the corners of her mouth curled up slightly, and then she put away the kunai and walked towards the classroom. Obviously, the action of Hyuga Chiryu kneeling down today made her mood extremely good. The haze from the last defeat was swept away, under the shade of the trees on the sports field. Only Hyuga Chiryu was left kneeling there, her head lowered deeply, her face full of madness. When it was close to class, Hyuga Chiryu walked into the classroom like a zombie. In fact, everyone in Konoha knew that the Hyuga clan was not allowed to marry outsiders. However, this was not gossip, and no one would deliberately talk about it. Hyuga Chiryu had never thought about it. However, after being exposed by Uchiha Mainai, Hyuga Chiryu immediately remembered that the people he saw in the clan were all from Hyuga clan. She had never seen a member of the Hyuga who was married out of the clan, nor had he seen anyone marry into her clan. Hyuga Chiryu simply confirmed it and found that what Uchiha Mainai said was the truth. During class, Hyuga Chiryu did not listen to a single word the teacher said. Her face was as pale as paper, and there seemed to be tears flowing in her eyes. However, Hyuga Chiryu forced herself to endure. "In other words, it is impossible for me to be with Tunan. Even if Tunan likes me, it is not possible. The Hyuga family will not agree." Hyuga Chiryu raised her hand and reached into the thick bangs, stroking the bird mark in the cage. Even putting everything aside, there was no possibility of eloping. The bird in the cage, a restriction that could never be broken free. Only after her death she could be freed. But the world of the dead did not have Tunan. Thinking of this, Hyuga Chiryu shifted her gaze slightly and looked at Uchiha Tunan's back. "Tunan, even if I die, I want to be with you." On the big tree outside the window, 2 white pigeons were nestled in bed. Uchiha Tunan took in everything that had happened between the two of them. Although he didn't know what they were talking about, he could guess it very well. Hyuga Chiryu was basically given up by Uchiha Tunan. All day long, she only knew love, and he had wasted a lot of time to eat with her. It was to give her enough hope so that she would be brave enough to compete with Uchiha Mainai. However, she did not want to work hard in her cultivation. Looking at her current appearance, it seemed that she was still a little dispirited. This ration could be considered useless. She could only look forward to Uchiha Mainai. After all, looking at Uchiha Mainai's situation, she should like that kitten very much. Wait for her to pour enough feelings into the kitten. Uchiha Tunan was prepared to find a suitable opportunity before the start of the Third War to kill the cat. This way, maybe Uchiha Mainai will open a high-level Sharingan. Chapter 22, Chiryu and the Cat. In the next few days, Hyuga Chiryu never came to look for Uchiha Tunan again. Every day, she sat in his seat, looking at Uchiha Tunan with a morbid gaze. She was as quiet as a corpse. This made Uchiha Tunan feel very uncomfortable. "Chiryu, have you not been resting well recently?" Hyuga Chiryu turned her head numbly and looked at Asuma, who had a concerned expression on his face. She paused for a moment, then put on a pale smile and hooked his finger at Asuma. Asuma's eyes lit up and he leaned his head closer. "Asuma, do you like me?" Hyuga Chiryu's voice was slightly hoarse, but it was like the sound of nature in Asuma's ears. Hee. Asuma scratched his head in embarrassment. Happiness came too suddenly, and for a moment, he was somewhat incoherent. "Can you help me with something?" Asuma patted his chest and said, "No problem. With me, Asuma, taking action, there is nothing that can't be done." Hyuga Chiryu's smile instantly disappeared and her face was full of coldness. She whispered, "Find a chance and help me kill the cat raised by Mainai." Asuma was choked. I was just teasing you. Hyuga Chiryu seemed to change her face, and a smile appeared on her face again. Asuma breathed a sigh of relief and said with an embarrassed face, haha, you scared me. Then, before he finished speaking, Hyuga Chiryu handed a note to Asuma and said, help me pass this note to Tunan. You are not allowed to peek. No problem. Asuma took the note and did not think too much about it. After all, everyone in the class knew that Uchiha Tunan and Uchiha Mainai were a pair. He came to Uchiha Tunan's side and placed the note in front of him. Chiryu asked me to give it to you. Uchiha Tunan took the note and opened it. He saw the note saying, Tunan, I want to talk to you alone. At 9 o'clock tomorrow night, under the waterfall on the east side of the Hokage Rock, see you. After reading it, Uchiha Tunan turned to look at Hyuga Chiryu and nodded to her. A smile appeared on Hyuga Chiryu's pale face. To tell the truth, Uchiha Tunan really didn't want to waste time playing some bullshit love story with the two children. But to become an excellent hunter, before revealing his fangs, he must always remember to disguise himself all the time. The next day. Today was October 6th. It was also a weekly vacation time and Sakuma was resting at home. Naturally, Uchiha Tunan would not waste such a good time. Early in the morning, he went to the Hatake clan to receive the training with Kakashi. He did not go home until the evening. After dinner, he went to the martial arts practice field in the north of the Uchiha clan to guide Uchiha in cultivation. At this time outside Uchiha's territory, Hyuga Chiryu came with a bag of cat food. Little girl, this is Uchiha's territory. What are you doing here? Two patrol officers saw Hyuga Chiryu and stopped him. Hyuga Chiryu was like a frightened kitten. She lowered his head, blushed, and said weakly, I'm here to find Mainai. One of the patrol officers glanced at the cat food in Hyuga Chiryu's hand and said impatiently, feed the cat, right? Hyuga Chiryu nodded weakly and said, yes. The patrol officer obviously felt that a few years old child was not dangerous. He waved his hand and said, go in. Hyuga Chiryu nodded and suddenly thought of something. He looked pitifully at the patrol officer and said, Uncle. This is my first time here. I don't know the way, but... No. I still have to patrol. I don't have time to show you the way. Mainai's home is over there. There are 2 cherry blossom trees in front of her door. The patrol pointed impatiently and then walked to other places. Thank you. Hyuga Chiryu bowed deeply to the back of the two, and then walked in the direction that the patrol had pointed out. Soon, Hyuga Chiryu arrived at Uchiha Mainai's house. Uchiha Mainai's parents died in the Second Ninja War, and she became orphans at a very young age. Before she went to school, the family had specially assigned her a guardian. But after Uchiha Mainai was admitted to the ninja school, the guardian was removed. At this time, there was no one in Uchiha's Mainai family, only a snow-white kitten lying on the floor in front of the door to rest. Squeak. The wooden door of the courtyard was ajar. After all, this was the territory of Uchiha. As long as everyone did not go out for a long time, they would usually only close the door, and the door of the courtyard was basically not locked. When Hyuga Chiryu pushed open the door, the kitten was immediately alert. With a whoosh, it hid behind the pillar and poked out half of its head to observe. But when she saw that it was Hyuga Chiryu, especially when Hyuga Chiryu was carrying cat food in his hand, the kitten instantly put down its vigilance and ran out. It was mainly because Uchiha Mainai brought the kitten with her every day after school. Only when she trained with Uchiha Tunan would she leave the kitten alone at home. The kitten had been in school for a long time, so it naturally had an impression of Hyuga Chiryu, so it was not afraid. Meow. As soon as Hyuga Chiryu stepped into the small courtyard, he saw the kitten run to his feet and kept rubbing its head against Hyuga Chiryu's trouser legs. The round cat eyes kept on the cat food Hyuga Chiryu was carrying. However, Hyuga Chiryu was unmoved by the little kitty's coquetry. He just quietly looked down with indifference in his eyes. The little kitty wanted to eat cat food, but it couldn't do this, so it could only change its way of acting like a spoiled child. In its memory, as long as it acted like a spoiled child, there would be delicious food. The little kitty immediately lay on the ground and rolled, revealing its snow-white belly, twisting and turning. She seemed to be saying, "Come and pet me up. Please give me food." The corners of Hyuga Chiryu's mouth gradually raised. She whispered, "How obedient." The kitten saw the woman in front of him smile and thought that she would soon be able to eat new cat food. It twisted even harder. Suddenly, a shadow blocked the kitten's line of sight. Bang! Meow. Unfortunately, you don't belong to me. Hyuga Chiryu slowly turned around and casually threw a note onto the kitten's corpse. Then, she carried the cat food bag out of the small courtyard and closed the door behind her. After leaving, Hyuga Chiryu returned to his delicate expression and walked towards the place he had agreed to meet with Uchiha Tunan. At this time Uchiha Tunan was still training Uchiha Mainai. Even if Uchiha Tunan trained a lot of white pigeons, it was impossible for him to monitor Konoha at any time. Therefore, he was not aware of what Hyuga Chiryu had done. Time slowly passed, and the sky was already completely dark. 9 o'clock. After Uchiha Tunan finished training Uchiha Mainai, he headed to the place he had agreed to meet with Hyuga Chiryu. At the same time, a group of white pigeons flew up from the forest and headed into the distance. Chapter 23, Setting Up a Trap. A full moon rose up, hanging high in the sky like a lamp. In the forest, Hyuga Chiryu walked expressionlessly. The shadows of the branches on both sides of the path reflected on the ground, giving people a cold and terrifying feeling. Hyuga Chiryu came to the front of the waterfall, a trace of reminiscence flashing through her eyes. When she was young, her mother often brought her here to have a picnic. If she got dirty, she would run to the river under the waterfall to take a bath. When she was lucky, she could catch 2 fish, but ever since her mother passed away, she never came here again. Hyuga Chiryu slowly squatted down and reached out to touch the slightly damp soil on the ground. The scene of Uchiha Tunan tutoring him on his homework rang in her mind. Explosive talismans are usually arranged in advance and used as a trap. Here, it has to talk about the influence of various environments on explosive talismans. First was the humidity. If the humidity was too high, the detonation talisman might be soaked and lose its effect. However, most of the time, due to the limited geographical environment, we have no way to avoid it. This needs to be handled with special methods. For ordinary explosion talismans, we can use a large amount of dry leaves to wrap them up, so that we can delay the time when the explosion talismans are soaked. We can also sprinkle a layer of stone dust on the surface of the explosion talismans. If there is enough time in that condition, we can go to other places to get some dry soil and wrap the explosion talismans inside. Of course, the expensive 3 defense explosion talismans do not need to be made that much. Hyuga Chiryu opened the cat food bag, took out the dry soil and spread it on the ground. Then he took out 3 explosive talismans from his pocket and placed them on the dry soil. Finally, she sealed it with the rest of the soil and covered the leaves around it as a disguise. Tunan, don't blame me. After saying this, Hyuga Chiryu walked to the small river next to her and took off her clothes as she walked. Crash! With the sound of the water, Hyuga Chiryu immersed herself in the small river naked. With her hands on the shore, she looked at the end of the path, waiting for Uchiha Tunan to arrive. At the same time, Uchiha Mainai had just returned home. As soon as she entered, she saw the cat corpse on the ground. She was stunned on the spot. Koyuki. Tears appeared in Uchiha Mainai's eyes as she rushed to the cat corpse. She saw that the cat's abdomen had been crushed into meat paste, and there was a frightened expression on its face. Who is it? Who is it? This cat had an extraordinary significance to Uchiha Mainai. Not only was it cute, but it was also the first gift Uchiha Tunan had given her. Suddenly, Uchiha Mainai saw the note on the ground. Trembling, she reached out and opened the note. It wrote, "If I can't get it, I'd rather destroy it. I left a note in the drawer of the classroom, which had my current position. Hyuga Chiryu, I will kill you. Uchiha Mainai clenched her teeth and wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes. However, she found that the vision in front of her was somewhat different from before. In the eyes of Uchiha Mainai, a Magatama slowly rotated. But Uchiha Mainai did not have the slightest joy of opening her Sharingan. She directly got up and ran towards the ninja school, in the forest path with mottled branches. Uchiha Tunan strolled expressionlessly. Every step he took was especially light, without making the slightest sound. Like a ferocious beast hunting in the darkness, it restrained its aura and was ready to strike at any time. Although the forest near the Woodleaf village, apart from the death forest that was sealed by the enchantment, there were basically no large beasts. But even so, Uchiha Tunan was used to keeping his guard up. Coo! Birds cried out in the dark forest. The time that Hyuga Chiryu and Uchiha Tunan agreed on was 9 o'clock at night. Uchiha Tunan naturally had to arrive at the right time to give the other party enough time to prepare. Crash! As he approached the waterfall, Uchiha Tunan heard the sound of Hyuga Chiryu stirring the water under the clamor of the waterfall. He looked over and saw a beautiful figure with her hands on the shore in the darkness. Her body was immersed in the water and she was looking at him in a daze. Tunan, you are here. Uchiha Tunan reached out and adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses. He pretended to be nervous and said, "Sorry, I came at the wrong time." After that, he immediately turned around. Hyuga Chiryu looked at the helpless Uchiha Tunan, and her face was filled with a triumphant smile. She whispered, "Tunan, you came at the right time. Wait for me. Chiryu, quickly put on your clothes." "Don't worry, I didn't see anything." After Uchiha Tunan finished speaking, he heard the sound of water behind him, as well as the sound of her bare feet stepping on the withered leaves. "All right, turn around." Hyuga Chiryu's voice rang out from behind him. Only then did Uchiha Tunan turn around. Suddenly, Hyuga Chiryu hugged Uchiha Tunan and leaned his head deeply into Uchiha Tunan's chest. "You." Looking at the naked Hyuga Chiryu in his arms, Uchiha Tunan was stiff like a chick. "Tunan, I like you. Do you know?" Hyuga Chiryu closed her eyes and hugged Uchiha Tunan's waist tightly. Uchiha Tunan looked at the ground behind Hyuga Chiryu. He saw water stains extending from the shore all the way here. Uchiha Tunan said in a nervous tone, "Yes. I know." Hyuga Chiryu tightened his arms around Uchiha Tunan and said excitedly, "Do you like Mainai?" The corners of Uchiha Tunan's mouth curved up slightly. He reached out his left hand and gently stroked Hyuga Chiryu's wet back. He said gently, "Why do you think so?" "I have always thought of her as my sister." It was unknown whether it was Uchiha Tunan's answer or his actions that worked, but Hyuga Chiryu was no longer so excited. "I hate it so much. Why am I a Hyuga clan? Do you know that the Hyuga clan does not allow people to marry outsiders? Especially since I am a member of the branch family, I have been engraved with a bird in a cage since I was born. Sometimes, I really feel like a bird locked in a cage. My life is destined to be controlled by the main family. I have no freedom and no future. I don't even have the right to pursue love. There must be a way to solve it." As Uchiha Tunan spoke, his left hand slowly moved down along the slippery curve until Hyuga Chiryu's slender waist and stopped. His right hand gently patted Hyuga Chiryu's back. Hyuga Chiryu felt Uchiha Tunan's warm palm wandering on her back. "My parents are obviously weak, but the main family ordered them to participate in the war. They have no right to refuse. Even when my father died on the battlefield, no one informed me. They didn't treat me as a human at all. I was instilled with the idea of being loyal to the main family since I was a child. I didn't want to, so I could only show weakness and make them think I was pitiful and useless. Then remove the bird cage and expel me from the Hyuga clan." Naive. Uchiha Tunan looked down at Hyuga Chiryu in his arms, and a trace of mockery flashed in his eyes. However, Hyuga Chiryu closed her eyes and did not notice this scene. She continued to complain, I am indeed too naive. Sometimes I even want to commit suicide. But I can't bear to part with you, do you know? Your appearance gave me the courage to live. You are so gentle and considerate. Uchiha Tunan patted Hyuga Chiryu's back again and again, and said in a slightly cold tone, really? You intended to commit suicide? Just like this, can you hug me for a while longer? There were tears in the corners of Hyuga Chiryu's eyes, which made Uchiha Tunan's chest wet. Chapter 24, Assassination Plot. At the same time, in the ninja school, Uchiha Mainai smoothly arrived at Hyuga Chiryu's seat and opened the note that was left behind. She knew where Hyuga Chiryu was at this time. Hyuga Chiryu, just you wait. I will definitely kill you. Uchiha Mainai held the note tightly in her hand and ran towards the address written on the note with a crazy expression. The moon and stars were bright, and a short while had passed. Hyuga Chiryu seemed to have fallen asleep and was unwilling to get up in Uchiha Tunan's arms. Seeing that it was about time, Uchiha Tunan patted the right hand on her back and paused. Then, he pushed Hyuga Chiryu away. Her left arm was still wrapped around his slender waist as he looked down at her eyes and said, Chiryu. I really admire you. As Uchiha Tunan spoke, he moved his lips a little closer. The two of them could even feel the heat that the other person exhaled. But your plan is too small. You do not have the heart of a strong person. A strong person would not be obsessed with so-called love. Come, let me give you a present. After saying that, Uchiha Tunan slowly lowered his head. A trace of intoxication flashed in Hyuga Chiryu's eyes, and she slowly closed his eyes. At the same time, the left arm around Hyuga Chiryu's slender waist suddenly tightened, pressing her delicate body against his. The empty right hand was slowly and rhythmically forming seals. After a few breaths, their lips and teeth separated. The two maintained a slight distance between their noses. Uchiha Tunan whispered in a magnetic voice, all right, it's about time. The explosive talisman was already wet. As soon as he finished speaking, Hyuga Chiryu suddenly woke up. She opened her eyes and rolled her eyes. Her delicate right hand slapped towards Uchiha Tunan's chest. Pooh. Z. An electric needle suddenly pierced through the back of Hyuga Chiryu's head, piercing through her entire head and piercing out from between his eyebrows. The next moment, the chakra in Hyuga Chiryu's right hand dispersed, and she powerlessly placed it on Uchiha Tunan's chest. In an instant, she lost all vitality and fell into the arms of Uchiha Tunan. You love me, and wanted me to be yours, and no one else should have me. This was not love, this was abnormal. It was unknown when Uchiha Tunan had opened his 3 Magatama Sharingan. His blood-red eyes looked at the corpse in his arms, and his face was full of heartache. No matter what the reason is, if you want me to die, then I can only kill you. You are so extreme. If you don't die, I won't feel safe. Suddenly, Uchiha Tunan felt a slight warmth flow through his body. This type of chakra attribute, water attribute and earth attribute. Not bad, this is. In Uchiha Tunan's line of sight, the meridians in Hyuga Chiryu's body were all visible. Looking up, the surrounding scenery seemed to have changed into a color, not the white from the authentic eye. It was a unique red color, just like an infrared detector. There was no blind spot in all 360 degrees. Chiryu, I didn't expect you to be a treasure girl. A happy expression appeared on Uchiha Tunan's face, and he instinctively controlled his eyes. In the next instant, the Sharingan disappeared, and the blue veins around Uchiha Tunan's eyes bulged. He opened his eyes. With the system's ability, Uchiha Tunan could freely change his Sharingan and eyes. It was also possible to add another ability to the eye technique when opening one. This was human nature. Asterisk whoosh star. Kunai cut across Hyuga Chiryu's neck and cut off her head. If you kill someone, then you have to deal with the aftermath. Konoha has the Yamanaka clan who can search for the memories of the dead. Bang! Hyuga Chiryu's headless body fell to the ground. Uchiha Tunan threw the head in his hand to the ground and quickly made a series of hand seals. Fire style, grand fireball technique. The blazing fireball instantly scorched the head. After doing everything, Uchiha Tunan unhurriedly tied the buttons on his collar and smoothed out the wrinkles on his shirt. Then he turned around and left along the path. After killing Hyuga Chiryu, he obtained the water and earth attribute chakra, as well as the rough and shallow soft fist. Of course, the most valuable thing was still the ability to get Byakugan. Moreover, he unexpectedly found that the Byakugan and the Sharingan could merge. In that case, in the dark forest, dozens of hidden white pigeons lit up their blood-red Sharingan. Everything in the nearby forest could be seen. As Uchiha Tunan expected, the Sharingan could control these white pigeons and share their vision. Now that the ability of Byakugan was integrated into the Sharingan, he could also use these white pigeons. However, to maintain this ability, he needed to consume a lot of chakra. But even so, Uchiha Tunan was satisfied. In the ninja world, the most important thing was intelligence. Even someone as powerful as Uchiha Madara could not withstand a single strike. Suddenly, through the shared vision of a white pigeon, Uchiha Tunan saw a familiar figure running through the jungle towards this place. He immediately stopped in his tracks, his face completely dark. He said coldly, "No wonder you want to delay time. Do you want the three of us to die together?" After saying that, Uchiha Tunan slowly walked into the dark forest. On the horizon, a large patch of dark clouds drifted over, slowly nibbling away at the full moon in the sky. In the distance, a huge shadow came, as if it wanted to swallow the entire forest. On the other side, the furious Uchiha Mainai was running through the forest. Soon, Uchiha Mainai arrived in front of the waterfall. It was just that the environment was too dark, so Uchiha Mainai could not see clearly. Just as she took 2 steps forward, she found that she seemed to step on something. She lowered her head and picked up the things on the ground. "This is the clothes of that bitch." Uchiha Mainai frowned. Her nose twitched slightly. She sniffed twice and muttered, "Why is there a smell of roasted meat?" Uchiha Mainai followed the smell and walked 2 steps. Suddenly, she froze in place. A cold chill ran down his spine toward the back of his head. Not far away, there was a naked headless female corpse lying on the ground. About 5 or 6 meters away from the female corpse, there was a charred head. The original face could no longer be seen, and the surrounding ground was scorched black. "This is..." Uchiha Mainai looked down at the clothes in her hands and swallowed. She roughly guessed that the dead person was Hyuga Chiryu. Although this was not the first time Uchiha Mainai had seen a dead person, she still felt a chill in her heart in this environment. She should have bathed in the river under the waterfall. Who could make her kill her before she had time to put on her clothes? In this situation, was she going to cut her head first and then burn her head with fire? Was that person gone? Could he be a ninja from the enemy village? Or could it be the abnormal ninja hidden in the village? She had heard from her family's aunt that she often found people peeping in the bathhouse. Uchiha Mainai had a lot of imagination, and the more she thought about it, the more afraid she became. She quickly threw down the clothes in her hands and ran in the direction of the Konoha village. There were branches and leaves everywhere along the way, and Uchiha Mainai, who was running at a high speed, stepped on them and made creaking sounds. She was ready to tell the garrison about this. Although Uchiha Mainai hated Hyuga Chiryu, after all, Hyuga Chiryu had been killed. And it was very likely that it was a spy from the enemy village who killed her. As a member of Konoha, this situation had to be reported in time. "It's good that she died. This bitch can no longer take notice of Tunan. Fortunately, I came late, otherwise, I might have been killed with her." Uchiha Mainai thought in her heart. Suddenly, a light flashed in Uchiha Mainai's mind as she ran. Her footsteps slowed down. Why did she not let me come directly at the beginning, but let me go to the classroom to get a note? She was stalling for time. She must have made an appointment with someone else in the beginning. That person. Tunan. Chapter 25, Suspicion. Uchiha Menai stopped and opened her palm. She looked at the note in her palm and her back was covered in cold sweat. How is this possible? There is no reason for Tunan to kill her. Uchiha Menai shook her head, denying this idea. She continued to run toward the village, but she felt a thorn in her heart. She began to recall what had happened today. Suddenly, Uchiha Menai noticed something was wrong. She completely stopped. After Tunan and I parted at the martial arts arena today, the direction we went was different from before. He was walking in this direction. According to the traces of the scene, that bitch's head should have been burnt by a fireball. Tunan knew this ninjutsu. If someone wanted to kill her in the beginning, her body should not be in that position, but should be on the shore. As a girl, the first thing she would do when finding a stranger must be to wear clothes. In other words, she walked to that position naked. Gulp. Uchiha Menai gulped and forced herself not to think about it. Just as Uchiha Menai was about to continue walking, a figure suddenly appeared on the road ahead. Facing the moonlight from this direction, Uchiha Menai could not see who it was. She could only vaguely tell that a man who was not tall had his back to her and that there was a bird lying on the man's shoulder. Uchiha Menai felt her blood go cold and her legs trembled. She could not walk. The fear in his heart spread throughout his body. At this moment, that person slowly turned his head. A pair of blood-red eyes lit up in the darkness. 3 Magatama swam in his eyes. Uchiha Menai widened her eyes in horror. She instinctively opened her mouth to scream, but she could not make a sound. However, she lost her voice in extreme fear. Step, step. The man walked towards Uchiha Menai step by step. Each step seemed to step on Uchiha Menai's heart. The distance between the two gradually closed, and Uchiha Menai also saw the face of the person. It was Uchiha Tunan. He saw Uchiha Tunan holding a vegetable basket in his hand, and with a refined and easygoing smile on his face, he said, "Menai, I didn't expect to meet you here. Are you also here for a picnic?" After that, he picked up the basket in his hand. He saw that the basket was filled with all kinds of wild ingredients. Yes, Tunan. Uchiha Menai smiled stiffly, and cold sweat dripped down her forehead. Uchiha Tunan smiled with narrowed eyes and patted the white pigeon on his shoulder. "Little guy, go find your own food." Goo goo, the white pigeon let out a cry, then spread its wings and flew into the forest. Then, Uchiha Tunan reached out his hand and gently grasped Uchiha Menai's fist that was holding the note. He gently said, "Your luck is pretty good today, you're lucky." At this moment, Uchiha Menai's mind was completely blank. She had long forgotten to resist and was pulled forward by Uchiha Tunan. Not long later, the two of them arrived at an open space. There was a bonfire in the middle of the open space. Above the bonfire, there was a stone supporting a metal pot. Uchiha Tunan pulled Uchiha Menai to sit down in front of the bonfire, and then poured the ingredients in the basket into the pot to cook. The light of the fire shone on Uchiha Tunan's face, flickering. The impeccable face and the eyes of Uchiha Menai looked so gloomy and horrible at this time. However, Uchiha Tunan did not make any strange movements. He just calmly looked at the bonfire and said, "I used the living expenses my parents left for me on the battlefield to buy books. There is nothing to eat. I often go to the forest alone to hunt and cook." At this time Uchiha Menai had also recovered. She probed, "Tunan, there is something I want to ask you." "Ask away." "What do you think of Chiryu?" Uchiha Menai tensed up. If she found something wrong, she was ready to run at any time. However, Uchiha Tunan did not show any difference. He flipped the food in the pot with his chopsticks and said casually, "Didn't I tell you before? I have always regarded her as my younger sister. To be honest, she is indeed very cute, but my mind is not on her." Uchiha Menai, who did not see anything strange, secretly heaved a sigh of relief. "Well, it smells so good." Uchiha Tunan picked up the only green mushroom in the pot with his chopsticks and handed it to Uchiha Menai. try it. Uchiha Menai looked at the green mushroom that was close to her. She suddenly remembered that the teacher had told her that the brighter the mushroom, the more poisonous it was. She immediately smiled stiffly. No need, I'm not hungry. Uchiha Tunan did not force it. He stuffed the green mushroom into his mouth and chewed it. He said with a face of enjoyment, it smells so good. I like to eat this kind of mushroom most. Unfortunately, I only found this one today. Then, he picked up a brown mushroom and stuffed it into his mouth. After eating, he glanced at Uchiha Menai, then picked up the brown mushroom from the pot and blew on it. Then, he placed it in front of Uchiha Menai's mouth and said with a gentle face, Come, this mushroom is also very delicious. Ah. When Uchiha Menai saw that Uchiha Tunan had already eaten this mushroom, she put down her guard and opened her mouth to eat it. A clear fragrance bloomed in her mouth. Uchiha Menai swore that she had never eaten such a delicious mushroom. Is it delicious? Faced with Uchiha Tunan's question, Uchiha Menai nodded, delicious. If it's delicious, then eat more. Uchiha Tunan picked up another brown mushroom and blew on it. At this moment, Uchiha Menai had already put down most of her guard. Tunan, I want to ask you something else. Huh? Have you met Chiryu today? No, why are you asking about her again? No, nothing. After saying that, Uchiha Menai opened her mouth and ate the mushroom in front of her. Uchiha Tunan shook his head and said with a face full of blame, Anyway, it is not safe for a girl to run into the forest at night. I heard that many girls in the village had an accident at night. The garrison is investigating everywhere. As soon as he finished speaking, Uchiha Menai immediately exclaimed, Ah? Is it a pervert? Uchiha Tunan seemed to have not heard the surprise in Uchiha Menai's words. He picked up the mushroom and casually said, It should be considered a pervert. Moreover, his strength is not weak. He hasn't been caught for so long. Uchiha Menai nodded. She hesitated for a moment and began to make a final test. Actually, I'm not here for a picnic, the weather is too hot. I went to the river to take a bath. Uchiha Tunan smiled and reached out to rub Uchiha Menai's beautiful hair. With a doting expression, he said, If that's the case, then you better wash it with water when you go home. After all, the river isn't too clean. If you are sick, I will be very distressed. Uchiha Menai completely put down her heart. She only felt that this person in front of her gave her a special sense of security. Menai, how can you doubt Tunan? Tunan is so good, how can he be the murderer? He also has no reason to kill that bitch. Even if he is lustful, as long as he opens his mouth, that bitch is willing to do anything for him. She was usually very smart, but how could she be so stupid at this time? Thinking of this, Uchiha Menai felt a sense of guilt in her heart. She began to consider whether she should tell Uchiha Tunan about Hyuga Chiryu. But after hesitating for a moment, she decided not to say it out loud. If Tunan found out, he would definitely go to the waterfall to check on the situation. What if that pervert went back? Tunan would be in danger. It was better to leave this matter to the garrison. Not long later, the food in the pot was eaten up by the two of them. Uchiha Tunan stood up and patted his butt. Alright, I'll send you home. I don't feel at ease leaving you alone in the middle of the night. After saying that, he held Uchiha Menai's hand and walked towards the Konoha village. Chapter 26, Nightmare Awakened. Just like that, the two of them walked out of the forest and walked along the streets of Konoha village towards Uchiha's clan. As they walked, Uchiha Menai suddenly staggered. Fortunately, Uchiha Tunan quickly hugged her and said with concern, Menai, what's wrong? Uchiha Menai's face gradually turned pale. She shook her head and said weakly, Tunan, I feel a little dizzy. Uchiha Tunan put the back of his hand on Uchiha Menai's forehead with a concerned expression. Ouch. It's so hot. It should be cold while bathing. No, no. Uchiha Menai wanted to explain, but she found that she could no longer speak. Her mind was in a mess, but she gradually could not remember what had just happened. At this moment, Uchiha Tunan held Uchiha Mainai tightly in his arms and leaned her head closer. The two of them kissed under the street lamp. In the distance, an umbu swept past the roof and looked over. Are all the little ghosts nowadays so good at playing adult? After muttering, the umbu did not want to stay here to eat dog food and left directly. After the umbu left, Uchiha Tunan let go of Uchiha Mainai. At this time Uchiha Mainai was completely unconscious. There was still a distance from Uchiha's territory. The rest of the road was not only to guard against the umbu, but also to avoid the night patrols in Uchiha's territory. The difficulty was not big. Uchiha Tunan picked up Uchiha Mainai by her waist and closed her eyes. The white doves hiding everywhere all lit up with bright red Sharingan. Coupled with the observation skills of the Byakugan, they could see the whereabouts of the patrolling people on the road ahead. So, Uchiha Tunan turned into a black shadow and dashed towards Uchiha clan. During this period, he constantly changed his direction and avoided the patrolling personnel at the right time. In the end, he arrived at Uchiha's beautiful house without any danger. Uchiha Tunan carried Uchiha Mainai into the small courtyard. He glanced at the cat corpse in the courtyard and strode into the room. He placed Uchiha Mainai on the bed. In the next instant, Uchiha Tunan observed Uchiha Mainai's meridians and acupoints through the observation of his eyes. Then, he ruthlessly pointed at Uchiha Mainai's sore point. Uchiha Mainai opened her eyes in a daze. The first thing he saw was the 3 Magatama that was rapidly spinning around Uchiha Tunan. Genjutsu, Hell Vision Technique. Late at night, dark clouds covered the sky, completely covering the moon. Rumble. The dull thunder rumbled, and bolts of lightning streaked across the sky. Uchiha Mainai was awakened by the thunder. She opened her eyes and looked around. This is... When did I return to my room? By the way, I remember that I was practicing with Tunan just now, and then I returned home. I saw... What did I see? Why can't I remember? Uchiha Mainai punched her head with her fist. Crash. The sound of rain could be heard from outside. For some reason, Uchiha Mainai had an unreal feeling. Suddenly, Uchiha Mainai widened her eyes. Through the curtains, one could see blue light flashing outside from time to time. A hazy humanoid shadow slowly walked past the window. Step, step. Uchiha Mainai quickly got up, took out kunai, and became alert. The footsteps spread all the way to the door, and then suddenly stopped. Rumble. The thunder roared, and lightning illuminated the outside of the house. For a moment, Uchiha Mainai saw the figure outside the door pulling out a long knife. Uchiha Mainai slowly moved to the side. She waited by the door. Time passed bit by bit. The person outside the door still did not move. The rain was too loud, and even if Uchiha Mainai held her breath and listened attentively, she could not hear any movement. Did he leave? Uchiha Mainai quietly swallowed her saliva and slowly moved her body a little. Her eyes were fixed on the door. Lightning flashed past and there was no one on the door. Who? Uchiha Mainai heaved a sigh of relief. Her entire body was soaked in cold sweat. Are you looking for me? A cold voice suddenly sounded from behind her. Uchiha Mainai suddenly turned her head, and her eyes instinctively opened the single Magatama Sharingan, her face full of horror. She saw a figure holding a long blade in his right hand and a circular object in his left hand. Lightning flashed outside the room, and the sudden light finally made Uchiha Mainai see who the person in front of her was. Uchiha Tunan. And his left hand was holding Hyuga Chiryu's head. Hyuga Chiryu's face was still frozen with fear and despair. There was blood left on the long saber, dripping down the tip of the saber to the ground bit by bit. No. No. Uchiha Mainai wanted to run, but her body seemed to be out of control, and she could only move toward the corner of the wall bit by bit. Uchiha Tunan walked toward Uchiha Mainai step by step, and slowly raised the long saber in his hand. Why? Why? Uchiha Mainai stretched out her trembling hand, wanting to form a seal, but she could not remember a single seal. Feel the pain. A cruel smile appeared on Uchiha Tunan's face, and the long saber stabbed into Uchiha Mainai's body. Uchiha Mainai felt a sharp pain, and her pupils contracted. Puchi. Puchi. Uchiha Tunan stabbed the long knife into Uchiha Mainai's body again. There seemed to be a hint of enjoyment on her face. As the blood flowed, Uchiha Mainai felt as if her mind was about to collapse. The strength of her body slowly disappeared. Gradually, the single magatama in Uchiha Mainai's eyes dissipated, and her eyelids slowly closed. Coo. Coo. What was that noise? What was it that was so wet? Uchiha Mainai slowly opened her eyes and woke up from the bed. The gentle sunlight shone through the window onto his body. Beside him, the kitten was sticking out its tongue and licking her face again and again. Uchiha Mainai sat up and wiped the water on her face. Then, she held Kitten in her arms and recalled carefully, "It seems like I had a nightmare. Are you hungry?" Meow. Oh no, I'm late. Uchiha Mainai screamed and quickly got up from the bed. Suddenly, Uchiha Mainai caught a glimpse of the calendar hanging on the bed. October 6th, what are you doing? It's a rest day. Uchiha Mainai breathed a sigh of relief. She took out the cat food from the cupboard and poured it in the cat basin. Then, she sat down for breakfast and went to sit under the eaves alone. She looked at the cherry trees in the yard and ate them. For some reason, Uchiha Mainai would be absent-minded for a while after eating a few mouthfuls, as if she had dementia. Even Uchiha Mainai herself did not notice that the surroundings were quiet, as if there was no one around. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, it was evening. Uchiha Mainai suddenly woke up. She looked up at the sky, then packed up her things and went to the martial arts arena. Along the way, the voices of the clansmen could be heard from the courtyards on both sides of the road. However, they could only hear their voice, but not their bodies. Uchiha Mainai did not think too much about it. At this time everyone should eat at home. Uchiha Mainai unknowingly arrived at the martial arts practice field. She saw that Uchiha Tunan was sitting on the lawn, waving at her with a smile on his face. Tunan. Uchiha Mainai murmured. Her face was filled with a happy smile as she slowly walked over. Chapter 27, Between Illusion and Reality. As the sky gradually darkened, Uchiha and Mainai felt that she was not in a good state today. When they were under Uchiha Tunan's guidance, she would always make small trips from time to time. Mainai, if you are not feeling well, go back and rest early. Uchiha Tunan patted Uchiha Mainai on the shoulder, pulling her back from her absent-minded state. I'm sorry, Tunan. Maybe it's because I didn't sleep well last night. Uchiha Mainai said apologetically. Then you go back first, I still have something to do. Uchiha Tunan rubbed Uchiha Mainai's hair lovingly. Uchiha Mainai nodded and walked back home weakly. However, when Uchiha Mainai reached home, she found that the cat had already died in the courtyard. There was also a note on the ground, which recorded the location of the waterfall. Uchiha Mainai, who was in an emotional state, opened her single Magatama Sharingan, threw the note on the ground, and ran out crazily. Deep in the night, Uchiha Mainai shuttled through the jungle and soon arrived not far from the waterfall. Suddenly, Uchiha Mainai stopped and hid in the dark through the dense bushes. She saw Hyuga Chiryu come out of the water naked, walked behind Uchiha Tunan, and hugged him. Tunan, I like you. Uchiha Mainai, who was hiding in the dark, was furious. She gnashed her teeth and said, this bitch. Sorry Chiryu, I know you like me. But I have always regarded you as my sister. I actually have someone in my heart. Uchiha Tunan's firm voice came from the darkness. Who? Who do you like? I have always liked Mainai very much. My heart has been completely occupied by her. Hearing Uchiha Tunan decisively refuse Hyuga Chiryu, Uchiha Mainai's anger instantly dissipated, and a trace of sweetness could not help but rise in her heart. What's so good about her? How am I inferior to her? Tunan, don't go. You can do whatever you want to me. Hyuga Chiryu roared hysterically. Chiryu, please behave yourself. Uchiha Tunan struggled to pull Hyuga Chiryu's hand away and left without looking back. Only Hyuga Chiryu was left sitting on the ground and crying. After a full 10 minutes, Uchiha Mainai quietly walked out of the woods and came behind Hyuga Chiryu. This bitch not only killed her cat, but also tried to seduce Tunan with her beauty. Kill her. Kill her. Uchiha Mainai seemed to hear the devil's urging in her heart. She subconsciously raised the kunai in her hand. Hyuga Chiryu seemed to be too sad and did not notice the movement behind her at all. Swish. The kunai cut across Hyuga Chiryu's neck and cut off her head. Only then did Uchiha Mainai react. She looked at the blood dripping on her hand in horror. I killed. What should I do? If other people know about this, I will be executed. Uchiha took a few steps back, feeling a deep sense of regret. Then she turned around and ran towards Konoha. After just 2 steps, she suddenly stopped, a trace of ferociousness flashing across her face. A voice suddenly sounded in his mind. The Yamanaka clan could search for the memories of the dead. Uchiha Mainai turned around, her bright red Sharingan staring at the head that rolled to the side, and her hands began to make a series of hand seals. Fire style, great fireball technique. Uchiha Mainai, who had never released a fireball before, successfully released the fireball. The huge fireball hit the head, instantly burning Hyuga Chiryu's head. After doing all of this, Uchiha Mainai no longer wanted to stay here for another second, and ran towards Konoha. However, at the intersection of the village, Uchiha Mainai bumped into Uchiha Tunan, who was walking towards the village alone. Mainai, why are you here? Uchiha Tunan asked with a puzzled face. Uchiha Mainai forced a calm smile and said, I can't sleep, so I came out for a walk. Uchiha Tunan nodded and said without hesitation, it's so late. It's not safe for a girl like you. I'll send you back. After saying that, he directly held Uchiha Mainai's hand and walked to the village. The two of them passed through several quiet streets and did not speak. Suddenly, Uchiha Tunan opened his mouth and said, Mainai, actually, I like you. Are you willing to date me? Tunan. Uchiha Mainai was willing to agree. However, there was still a human life in her hands. At this moment, her heart was in a mess, and she was not in the mood to talk about love. Tunan, I have something to tell you. Uchiha looked at Uchiha Tunan in front of her with infatuation. Speak. Just now. I killed Hyuga Chiryu. It was so sudden. Do you think I will be executed by the village? The more Uchiha Mainai spoke, the more emotional she became, and her eyes began to flicker with tears. Who? Uchiha Tunan was shocked and took a long time to catch his breath. Then he said seriously, as your boyfriend, I will definitely protect you. The investigation will definitely be carried out. Tomorrow, I will go to the Hokage and confess to him, begging him to be dealt with lightly. But. Calm down. Uchiha Tunan shouted, then took a deep breath and said in a gentle tone, listen to me, you don't have to worry about this. Mainai, I love you. Finished speaking, Uchiha Tunan kissed Uchiha Mainai on the forehead, then used a hand knife to knock her out. In the room of Uchiha Mainai. Uchiha Tunan's forehead was covered with sweat, and a trace of exhaustion flashed through his eyes. He closed his eyes, then withdrew his Sharingan. Reaching out, he took out the note that Uchiha Mainai was holding tightly in her hand and left the room. Arriving at the cat corpse in the courtyard, Uchiha Tunan placed the note next to the cat corpse and then put away the note that was originally on the ground. Everything was ready, and the scapegoat was also arranged. Uchiha Tunan left the place in a flash, like a ghost in the darkness, running home. When he found Uchiha Mainai in the forest, Uchiha Tunan had already thought of a plan. First, let Uchiha Mainai eat the mushroom that contained neurotoxins. This mushroom could make people lose their recent memories. Although Uchiha Tunan also ate it, Uchiha Tunan ate the green mushroom that had a detoxifying nature. In order to ensure that the neurotoxin could successfully erase Uchiha Mainai's memories, Uchiha Tunan also used illusion techniques to continuously destroy Uchiha Mainai's mental strength. This allowed the neurotoxin to be of the greatest use. The next step was to build an illusion for her, covering all the memories that Uchiha Mainai had experienced in the illusion. The last step was to exchange the evidence. Presumably, the higher-ups of Konoha would not send two professional people to investigate such a small matter with conclusive evidence. If there was a mistake, there would be a flaw. He could only hope that the Hokage would be able to protect himself. He had used up too many chakra and spiritual energy to construct the illusion for Uchiha Mainai. After returning home, Uchiha Tunan immediately fell asleep. Tomorrow, there would be a good show. Chapter 28, The Interrogation. The next day, it was just dawn. Uchiha Tunan struggled to get up. He had consumed too many chakra to cast the high-intensity illusion technique yesterday, and it was difficult to recover after sleeping for only a few hours. His body was still in a semi-weakened state. The first thing he did when he got up was to open the diary. During this period of time, there was nothing major. The diary was basically filled with water. The contents of the Will of Fire were written over and over again, and Uchiha Tunan was about to vomit. October 6th. Something big happened today. I thought about it for a long time, but could not write. Chiryu asked me to meet at the waterfall in the forest at night, saying that she had something to tell me. But I did not expect that she would not wear clothes in front of me. She also wanted to be my woman. I ran away. I only regarded her as my sister, and I had long liked Mainai in my heart. I thought this matter would end here. But I didn't expect to meet Mainai on the way back to the village at night. Her expression was very strange, but I didn't notice it at first. I mustered the courage to confess to her and even kissed her. She did not refuse. I was so happy at that time that I felt that I was the happiest person in the world. But she told me that she killed Chiryu with her own hands. I didn't know what to do. According to the rules of the village, the behavior of Mainai should be executed. But I was reluctant. Only Mainai and I knew this secret. On one side is the village, and on the other is my lover. How should I choose? The handwriting of the diary was very messy and scrawled, and it suddenly stopped when it reached this point. Uchiha Tunan also specially left a few ink points in the blank space behind. Then he casually threw the pen on the open diary and left the room with a look of disappointment. After dilly-dallying on the road for more than 2 hours, Uchiha Tunan finally stood in front of the Hokage's building. In the Hokage's office, Sarutobi was leisurely leaning on a chair and smoking a cigarette. Suddenly, Sarutobi sat up straight. Then, Uchiha Tunan knocked on the door of the office. "Please come in." Uchiha Tunan pushed open the door and walked into the office. He looked at Sarutobi with a pale face and hesitated to speak. Then, he slowly lowered his head and remained silent. "Tunan, what happened?" Uchiha Tunan clenched his fists and suddenly knelt on the ground. Tears overflowed from his eyes, and he said with a sobbing tone, "Hokage-sama, I killed someone, please execute me." Sarutobi was shocked, and he came to Uchiha Tunan and said in a low voice, "Tunan, look up at me." Uchiha Tunan slowly raised his head and looked at Sarutobi for less than a second before shifting his gaze away. His eyes kept glancing around, looking extremely guilty. Sarutobi frowned, feeling a little uncertain. The most important thing now was to suppress this matter first. Sarutobi immediately called the Umbu over. "Bring Tunan to the interrogation department. Without my order, no one can interrogate him." Sarutobi ordered with a serious face. "Yes." The Umbu responded, grabbed Uchiha Tunan and left the office. Sarutobi felt that the matter was a bit tricky. Uchiha Tunan had shown value far beyond his peers, and he was also loyal to him. If he were to be executed like this, Sarutobi felt very reluctant. But killing in the village, no matter who killed, according to the rules, must be executed. If it really doesn't work, arrange him to the root, and then conceal his identity. It can also be regarded as saving his life. Sarutobi had already begun to consider the last way out. No, since he had decided to turn himself in, why was he so guilty? Sarutobi narrowed his eyes and found something unusual. Guilt means he lied, then. Hokage-sama. Go to Tunan's house and bring him his diary. Yes. More than 10 minutes later, the brought Tunan's diary to Sarutobi. Sarutobi quickly flipped to the last few days. Sure enough, this child actually started dating without a word. On one side was the village, and on the other was his girlfriend, so you chose to make yourself a scapegoat? Sarutobi closed the diary and handed it to the Return the diary and bring Uchiha Menai to the interrogation department. Yes, Hokage-sama. After the left, Sarutobi walked towards the interrogation department with his hands behind his back. Konoha's interrogation department was built underground, and there were special ninjas guarding it everywhere. Hokage-sama. Ryo Yamanaka, the commander of Konoha's interrogation team, also greeted Sarutobi at the door. The two of them talked as they walked towards the interrogation room. Ryo, is Tunan still not being interrogated? Yes, do you want to interrogate him personally? No need, I'll just listen. The latest intelligence shows that the murderer is Uchiha Menai, and she is also Tunan's little girlfriend. Sarutobi gave a meaningful reminder. Well, I understand. There was a small room next to the interrogation room. There was a one-sided mirror between the interrogation room, and Yuan Fizan was sitting in this room, quietly watching the situation in the interrogation room. Meanwhile, Ryo walked into the interrogation room with a cold face. He saw Uchiha Tunan sitting on the chair in a daze, not even raising his head. Ryo coughed lightly and began interrogating him. Uchiha Tunan, I understand your situation, but there are still a few questions I want to ask you. Uchiha Tunan said with a look of despair, say it, I will confess. What do you mean you will confess? The veins on Ryo's forehead bulged. If not for the fact that Sarutobi was watching next door, he would have punched Uchiha Tunan first. Taking a deep breath, Ryo also opened the book, picked up the pen, and quickly wrote while asking questions. What is your relationship with the deceased? Classmate. Where was the last time you met? Under the waterfall on the east side of the Hokage Rock. What was she doing at that time? She was bathing. What was your motive for killing her? Motive? Uchiha Tunan was stunned when he heard this. That's why I wanted to kill her. Perhaps it was because he asked too quickly, but it seemed like Uchiha Tunan hadn't thought of how to answer at all. His eyes kept moving to the left, and he said hesitantly, because she likes me. Ryo slammed his pen on the book and shouted, do you think it's reasonable? But I don't like her. Uchiha Tunan was so anxious that he was sweating profusely. She didn't wear clothes in front of me and even hugged me. I was very confused, so I. Do you know the consequences of taking the blame for others? Ryo's tone was completely cold. He crossed his arms over his chest and gave up the idea of taking the statement. At this point, he had basically confirmed that Uchiha Tunan was not the murderer. There was no point in taking notes. I didn't take the blame for others. I really didn't. I didn't. Please believe me. Uchiha Tunan shed tears and kept begging towards Ryo Yamanaka. Ryo Yamanaka also sneered and said in a low voice, well, one last question. How did you kill her? The moment the question came out, Uchiha Tunan immediately fell silent. He could only lower his head deeply and gasp for breath. After a full 10 seconds, he raised his head and said with an uncertain tone, I can't remember it clearly. I think she was killed by kunai. To be specific, where is the location of the cut? Is it 2 centimeters above the left side of the heart? Ryo Yamanaka also slammed his fingers on the table, as if reminding Uchiha Tunan. Yes, it's there. Uchiha Tunan widened his eyes and said in an extremely confident tone. However, when Ryo heard Uchiha Tunan admit it, he immediately started to pack up his notebook and pen, not even bothering to look at Uchiha Tunan. Enough, we're done here. The deceased had her head cut off by someone and burned his head with a fireball. Uchiha Tunan, you have to be punished for obstructing official duties. In front of the interrogation department, you still want to take the blame for others. Stupid. After saying that, Ryo left the interrogation room without looking back and went to the next room. Chapter 29, Confession. Hokage-sama, you heard it too. Hey, did you manage to catch Uchiha Menai? Before you came to the interrogation room, she was already locked in the interrogation room. Are you going to start the interrogation now? Let's go. The two of them left the room and went to the room next door where Uchiha Menai was imprisoned. At this time Uchiha Menai sat on the chair, her face full of fear and restlessness. Bang! Ryo Yamanaka also walked into the interrogation room and sat in front of Uchiha Menai expressionlessly. He began to interrogate her. Tell me the details of yesterday's event. If you confess, you may be able to get a light punishment. You should know that Uchiha Tunan wanted to take the blame for you today, but his lies were too clumsy and I saw through them. If you don't confess, then I can only do things according to the law and put him to death. Ryo Yamanaka also made a small lie in order to give Uchiha Menai pressure. Tunan, does he want to die for me? No, I don't want to do this. I was the one who killed her. It has nothing to do with Tunan. Obviously, Uchiha Menai was not so complicated. When she heard what Ryo Yamanaka said, she was becoming more and more nervous. Why did you kill Hyuga Chiryu? I'm sorry. I was impulsive. Answer my question. Why did you kill Hyuga Chiryu? She killed my pet cat first and seduced Tunan with her naked body. I was too angry at that time. Your pet? Yes, it was the cat Tunan gave me. It is also the first gift he gave me. Ryo Yamanaka also quickly wrote down the motive of the crime in the notebook. He nodded with satisfaction and said, very good. Let's start from yesterday. Don't miss anything. You can't hide it from me. Yesterday. Soon, Uchiha Menai told him what happened in her memory. Ryo Yamanaka also frowned and said in a low voice, we're done here. Yes. Uchiha Menai nodded, her eyes was full of despair. Tunan, thank you for your kindness. But I will bear the responsibility of my own actions. Ryo also left the interrogation room with the statement and came to Sarutobi. Hokage-sama, according to the confession of Uchiha Menai, she really killed Hyuga Chiryu. This is the statement, please check it. Sarutobi took the statement and carefully looked at it. The motive, process, and the description of the crime scene were exactly the same. Well, there should be no mistake. Ryo hesitated for a moment, but still voiced out the doubts in his heart. But I feel that something is wrong. What's wrong? Hiruzen Sarutobi raised his head in confusion. I don't know. I can't say for sure. It's just my intuition. She killed her classmates. According to the rules of the village, she will be executed anyway, so if you still have a doubt you can check her memory. Yes, Hokage-sama. Ryo Yamanaka also responded, and was about to order someone to check Uchiha Menai's memory. Wait a moment. I'll go talk to Tunan first and ask for his opinion. Yes. This time, Hiruzen Sarutobi also saw Uchiha Tunan's position in his heart. Asking for his opinion. Could it be that Uchiha Tunan said that he wouldn't let us check his memories? Or, as long as Uchiha Tunan insisted on pleading, would the Hokage protect a death sentence for him? Hiss, a little kid from Uchiha's clan actually had such a heavy weight. In the interrogation room, Uchiha Tunan had his hands in his hair, and he looked depressed and dispirited. Tunan. Sarutobi quietly walked into the interrogation room, came to Uchiha Tunan's side, and gently patted his shoulder. Uchiha Tunan raised his head and looked at the kind Sarutobi in front of him, as if he had seen his family, and his eyes flashed with tears. He hugged Sarutobi and cried, Hokage-sama, The corners of Hiruzen Sarutobi's mouth curved up slightly. He sighed and said, "Child, I know what you are thinking, but there are some things that we cannot change. Mainai has confessed. According to the rules of the village, she must be executed. This way, we can give the villagers and the Hyuga clan an explanation." Uchiha Tunan was stunned when he heard this. He looked at Hiruzen Sarutobi in disbelief and said, "Will I die?" Hiruzen Sarutobi did not answer directly. He hesitated for a moment and asked, tentatively, "After all, the deceased is from the Hyuga clan, not your Uchiha's internal affairs. No one can be biased. Tunan, I hope you can understand." Hiruzen Sarutobi already had a plan in his heart. If Uchiha Tunan insisted on protecting Uchiha Mainai, Hiruzen Sarutobi could only use other methods to secretly protect Uchiha Mainai. In this way, Uchiha Tunan would definitely be grateful and work wholeheartedly for him. However, this method would sacrifice many benefits and would affect his authority to a certain extent. At this moment, Uchiha Tunan stopped crying and slowly stood up. He wiped his tears and said to Hiruzen Sarutobi, "I know, governing the village is the foundation of the village. I'm sorry, Hokage-sama, I was foolish before. Please forgive my selfishness." After that, he put his hands on his knees and bowed deeply to Sarutobi. It seems that the village and I have a much higher position in his heart than that little girl. Hiruzen Sarutobi was slightly happy in his heart. It was naturally great that he could solve this matter without using special methods. Moreover, with the death of Uchiha Mainai, Uchiha Tunan completely lost his family and love. At that time, he would be his only sole lodging. Very good, very perfect. It's fine. After all, you are still young and not mature enough. I hope that you won't be dissatisfied with the village because of Mainai. Uchiha Tunan took a deep breath and shook his head firmly. No, it's her own fault. No one else can blame her. I'm not the kind of person who can't tell right from wrong. Sarutobi nodded and said, "Because it concerns life, and she is about to be executed, the interrogation department needs to check her memory." Uchiha Tunan's heart sank, and he knew that things were not good. On the surface, he said with a pained expression, "Will it affect her body?" Hiruzen Sarutobi hesitated for a moment, but he still answered honestly, "The longer the investigation were carried out then chance of it affecting her mentality would also be bigger. Fortunately, it hasn't been too long since the case. I only need to investigate yesterday's memories. There shouldn't be any problems. However, this process might be a little painful." Uchiha Tunan closed his eyes sadly and said in a hoarse voice, "She must be very scared right now. As her boyfriend, I want to accompany her. If something happens during the investigation, I can remedy it in time." Hiruzen Sarutobi naturally would not refuse such a simple request. He immediately nodded and said, "Okay." Chapter 30, Memories Don't Lie. Hiruzen Sarutobi led Uchiha Tunan out of the interrogation room and instructed Ryo Yamanaka, "When you check your memories later, let Tunan watch from the side. I still have something to do. I'll leave the rest to you." "Understood. Hokage-sama, sorry to trouble you." Sarutobi gently patted Uchiha Tunan on the shoulder and sighed, "It's no big deal." After watching Sarutobi leave, Ryo Yamanaka glanced at Uchiha Tunan and said, "Let's go." Uchiha Tunan nodded and followed Ryo to the depths of the interrogation department. The two came out of the interrogation room, and the two guards bowed and said, "Lord Ryo." Hiruzen Sarutobi pointed at Uchiha Tunan and said, "Well, let this little guy go in and watch. If there is anything, let me know." "Yes." Uchiha Tunan walked into the interrogation room alone and saw that there were all kinds of medical equipment and unknown drugs everywhere. In the middle was an iron bed with an incandescent lamp hanging above it. Uchiha Mainai was lying on the iron bed. Her hands, feet, and neck were fixed by metal rings, and her eyes were also covered. Her breathing was gentle and even, and she should be asleep. Two ninjas in the room who were responsible for the memory check were preparing. A man named Shunkawa Yamanaka sits in a chair and sorting out papers. The other is Ryoki Yamanaka, who is drawing blue potion from the syringe. Sit here. Don't talk or move around. Shunkawa Yamanaka tidied up the documents and pointed to the chair next to him without raising his head. Uchiha Tunan sat on the chair with a silent face. Is the tranquilizer ready? This little girl is young. Don't exceed the quantity. Shunkawa Yamanaka in the mountain arranged the documents and reminded Ryoki. Ryoki nodded silently and came to Uchiha Mainai. He inserted the syringe into her blood vessels and pushed the medicine into her. I can start now. As soon as he finished speaking, Ryoki reached out his hands and pressed them between Uchiha Mainai's eyebrows, beginning to search her memories. Suddenly, Uchiha Mainai's entire body shook, as if she was struck by lightning. Her mouth let out a whoosh sound, as if she was enduring unbearable torture. With a cold expression on his face, Ryoki closed his eyes and began to narrate, I saw it. It's October 6th. Next to Uchiha Tunan, Shunkawa began to quickly record it in his notebook. Get up, feed the cat, and make breakfast. She is, in a daze in the yard. Uchiha Tunan looked at all this with a distressed face, but his heart skipped a beat. Sure enough, there were still flaws in the illusion for a long time. How long did she in a daze? It's already past noon. It's afternoon. She packed her things and went out. Uchiha Tunan maintained a distressed expression on his face, but he was constantly calculating in his heart. From the chakra fluctuation of this interrogator ninja, they should be a Chunin. The other should be the same. If I cast an illusion on the two of them. No, it's too risky. Let's look again. When she arrived at the martial arts arena, she met a person called Uchiha Tunan. She was sparring with me last night, Uchiha Tunan interrupted abruptly. Shunkawa's face turned cold as he roared in a low voice, don't talk. I'm sorry. Uchiha Tunan lowered her head, but there was a flash of coldness in her eyes. Her mental state is very poor. She is constantly absent-minded during the training. She will be home in about an hour. She found that the cat she raised was dead. There was also a note beside the cat's body. It said. Shunkawa nodded as he recorded it. It was obvious that the contents of her memories matched the evidence she had found. It was solid. She went to the waterfall and hid in the grass. She saw Uchiha Tunan and a girl. The girl was called Hyuga Chiryu and was expressing her love for Uchiha Tunan. Uchiha Tunan refused and left. She came out. She cut off the girl's head and burned her head with a fireball. On the iron bed, Uchiha Mainai seemed to have epilepsy. Her body convulsed and white foam overflowed from her mouth. Enough. She can't take it anymore. Don't torture her anymore. Uchiha Tunan shouted loudly, affecting Ryo's concentration. The release of his ninjutsu was interrupted. Beside him, Shunkawa looked at Uchiha Tunan with a gloomy face and said coldly, Uchiha Tunan, right? Do you know the consequences of hindering interrogation? If you do this again, please leave. Otherwise, I cannot fulfill my duty as an interrogator. After saying this, he turned to Ryoki and said, continue, and look at the memories of the day before later. No, kill me, kill me. Because the casting was interrupted, Uchiha Mainai finally regained her ability to speak and kept wailing. Ryoki ignored Uchiha Tunan and Mainai's pleas. After all, he had seen too many such scenes. As long as he continued to cast the spell later, the convenient person would not let out an annoying howl. He immediately placed his hands between Uchiha Mainai's eyebrows. When he heard that Shunkawa had requested to investigate the memories from the day before, a cold light flashed in Uchiha Tunan's eyes. In the next instant, the Magatama in Uchiha Tunan's eyes moved. He directly took out kunai, turned into a black shadow, and leaped towards Uchiha Mainai. Little brat, I have tolerated you for a long time. The two ninjas from the Yamanaka clan reacted very quickly, and they subconsciously paid attention to Uchiha Tunan, whose emotions were fluctuating violently. They immediately attacked Uchiha Tunan one after another, ready to subdue him. Bang! Bang! Uchiha Tunan was punched in the abdomen by Ryo Yamanaka, and his vest was kicked by Shunkawa. He immediately spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground. Mene! Uchiha Tunan's eyes were unfocused, and he raised his hand towards Uchiha Mene, who was on the iron bed. This person might have some special identity, so he won't get into trouble, right? Ryoki frowned. Obstructing official business, and causing trouble to the Hokage-sama, is also reasonable. With that, he grabbed Uchiha Tunan's hair and dragged her to the door. The door of the interrogation room was opened, and the two guards outside looked at Shunkawa in surprise. Shunkawa, what are you doing? Put him down. Jun Chuan was stunned when he heard that. He asked in confusion, what are you talking about? Then he subconsciously looked down. This was Ryoki. Where is that little brat? He saw that the person Shunkawa was dragging was not Uchiha Tunan, but his companion, Ryoki. What was even more terrifying was that at this moment, Ryoki was still in deep thought. He seemed to still be worried about whether Uchiha Tunan had a strong background or not. Shunkawa quickly put Yamanaka Ryoki down. The three of them looked at each other and turned their heads. Shit. In the interrogation room, the incandescent light shone on the iron bed in the middle. Uchiha Tunan's figure poked out from the dark, his face pale and his eyes sparkling with jade. She gently stroked Uchiha Mene's hair with one hand and aimed kunai at Uchiha Mene's heart with the other. Tunan. Uchiha Mene murmured. The illusion in her mind began to fail and her memories recovered a little. An incomplete picture flashed through her mind. Then it was fixed on the scene of Uchiha Tunan using an illusion on her. At this moment, Uchiha Mene understood everything. She immediately used all her strength to struggle. However, her limbs and neck were locked in a metal ring, and she could not move at all. Seeing this, Uchiha Tunan showed a sad look on his face and said in a hoarse voice, Mene, it's all right. It won't hurt anymore. However, Uchiha Tunan's voice was as terrifying as the whispers of a demon in hell in Uchiha's ears. She immediately cried out in fear, someone please save me.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. If you have any suggestions for future videos or feedback for me, please comment down below.